Ever wonder what it really takes to make zero trust work in practice? Welcome to Zero Trust Journey, the podcast that cuts through the noise and dives into real stories and strategies to bring zero trust to life. The cybersecurity world is flooded with buzzwords and vendor hype, but here we focus on what truly matters, practical insights and lessons from those who've walked the path. Each episode is inspired by real experiences, grounded in our research, and enriched by the challenges and triumphs of our guests. If you're ready to grow your skills, deepen your insights, and take actionable steps toward a stronger zero trust strategy, you've come to the right place. Let's get started. The views and opinions expressed on the Zero Trust Journey podcast, webcast are solely those of the participants and do not represent the views of their employers or affiliated organizations. This content is provided for educational and informational purposes only. Neither the employers nor any sponsors are liable for actions taken based on the content discussed.
Today, we're super excited to bring you Clay Taylor and Tarek Dawood from the Zero Trust Working Group over at Microsoft. Guys, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourselves. Tell us, kind of your journey to where you are now.
Sure. Well, Steve, I have been at Microsoft now for 10 years. I have been working in the Intune product group for almost all of that time. For the past 5 years, I've really been focused on zero trust. Not just zero trust, but really zero trust deployment, like actually working with customers, as you said, to cut through all of the bowl and actually get to the deployment piece of zero trust, actually working with customers day by day, going through the main steps that they have to go through for zero trust and actually helping them see the reality of implementing a zero trust strategy in their environment.
My name is Tarek Dawood, and I am a lead architect in the customer engineering team. That is the identity customer engineering team, a sister team of Clay's devices customer engineering team. And as Clay said, over the last 3.5 years, Clay, me and him have been kind of on a V team that was trying to kind of get us out of those silos of me trying to sell or deploy Entra, him trying to deploy Intune, each of us, not only the space. And we've been trying to kind of break kind of these barriers. And because at the end of the day, the customers are trying to secure themselves end to end. And then, as famously John Lambert from Microsoft says, attackers think in graphs, and defenders think in lists. So if you're just thinking devices, you're thinking in lists. If you're just thinking identities, you're thinking in lists, right? So you kind of have to think about how to secure the scenarios end to end. And yes, we've been partnering so much that sometimes we're confused. He's Clay Dawood and I'm Tarek Taylor sometimes. So
I think this demonstrates and shows that why for zero trust the silos have to be broken, and you are living proof of that. So again, welcome to the show. We're really excited to have you.
So kind of like diving into what we're looking at here on the screen today, tell us a little bit about what the genesis was for this workshop. Okay, both of you, worked in traditionally these siloed teams, at Microsoft, were charged with this goal of going cross team and figuring out how people kind of implement these things. And now zero trust is kind of at the forefront, right? Tell us a little bit about how, you arrived at that, hopping kind of into what we're looking at.
I think zero trust broke onto a scene in 2019, 2020 with a bigger kind of push from lots of different vendors, events where, and back then there was a lot of resistance among our customers. For example, we would have customers who would be like, oh, zero trust is just a marketing fad. It's just a thing. And of course, the vendor ecosystem didn't always help because you'd have someone selling a point solution saying it's a zero trust solution. How does this fit to zero trust? And so, but the reality has moved now to where NIST, the DoD, the Open Group, bunch of standards now are out there, and it is the accepted kind of term now for how to secure access end to end in your organization. And that also took a while, even within Microsoft, to kind of take hold. But it has taken hold. And now, even internally, Microsoft has been on a zero trust journey. If you ask the CISO's office, they've been on a zero trust journey for 7 years. But just to get the broader, the product groups and others to talk about it in the same way, it's taken some time. But the research we shows is that it's pretty real. So this is kind of research we did a year and a half ago. It is actually top of mind. Clay and I both work with customers directly, right? And 4 out of my 5 customers are right now currently on a zero trust journey, funded by their CISO and their board of directors. This is how they're talking about improving their cybersecurity posture. So it's becoming real. So that's kind of the first thing that helped us, and also put that burden on us that we have to start helping customers deploy end-to-end zero trust.
Yeah, I would say, we also saw this, as Tarek was saying, back in 2019, it was almost this hesitance or reluctance to really focus on zero trust. And then the pandemic hit and everyone started working remotely. And I can't tell you, like, I think, Tarek said 4 out of 5. I think I'm at 100% of my customers now that are on a zero trust journey. And, for all of them, it started within the last couple of years where they basically realized, hey, I really can't rely on my network perimeter anymore. All of my workers, at least have the option of working remotely at least part of the time. And we really need to rethink how we're protecting our assets in this, new world of remote work. So, that's just one of the area I think has really helped push zero trust along as well.
I think that aligns with what we hear and see in the industry. And obviously, Steve and I do a lot of research and surveys on this one, where when did this become a real thing? Until I think 18, everybody understood what zero trust is, what they need to do. Then they got familiar with the concept, but it became real when 3 things happened. One, people realized that they need to work outside of their buildings, where they used to bring all the employees or the force all the network connections coming out of their firewalls. That was one where it's a distributed workforce now, contractors, full-time employees, all of that. Second, they realized the proliferation of SaaS and public cloud adoption, where now the applications are not just sitting on the servers, which is 3 feet away from them. It's all over the world, and they have no control over where the applications are, but they need to make sure the access to it's secured. Third, and this is the biggest one, I think, where almost mainstream media, if you actually look at some of the surveys, it really brought to the forefront of it where nothing is secure, which is, even if you have all your tools and agents installed on the computer, it can change the device posture. If you assign the identity to a person, that person can be maybe manipulated or one way or the other. We just can't have a blind trust into devices or identity in applications. There needs to be someone in the central sitting there, almost like a methodical and programmatical way of deciding who gets what, when, and how. I think that's what I see. What Steve? What do you agree to it, or do you want to add something to it?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, Victor. And something that I thought was interesting that Tarek, that you were mentioning as you were kind of going through the research and the customer experiences that you were, helping with, or kind of, thrown into the fire around, the pandemic and everything, like you kind of called out, Clay. I remember at one of my former employers, we had like a 2-year project to get off of VPN all over to a SASE solution. Suddenly we're like creating this patchwork of craziness and split tunneling Microsoft 365 traffic. And again, I'm seeing both of you nod your heads. So, it's like, this is like lived reality that everybody's kind of had to suffer through. Something I wanted to call out that, Tarek, I want to do, you guys justice, because you have the research up here on the screen, but something that our viewers don't know is that you both actually participated in the research with NIST to help design some reference architectures that organizations can use, knowing that their reality may not be all Microsoft, for example, to deploy, zero trust architecture. Can you talk a little bit about that? Talk about your experience with that? Because I know you guys were like heads down building out a lot of those environments and working with some frenemies.
I think Vasu and Charlie Bell say security is a team sport. We keep saying it. I think everybody in the industry now says it. But yes, out of 2 of the 4 years that I've been working very closely with Clay, I think 2+ years we were in the, I want to say the right name for your audience to find it. It's called the NIST NCCOE Zero Trust Implementation Lab. which is publication, I believe, 1800-53, which supplements 200-20, 800-207. 800-207 is the NIST reference architecture for zero trust. 1800-53, I could be misremembering the numbers, is the actual work we worked on, which is basically after NIST put out the reference architecture, they wanted to put out a guide that helps people actually implement their, back to the main point about, it's very easy, and I'm going to go back to some of these other slides I'm going to skip over, but it's very easy to look at this picture and say, wow, I know what I'm going to do. And to actually go out and do it, I'm going to show the NIST picture you're referring to. This is the NIST reference architecture, the gray boxes in the background, superimposed with the Microsoft products that you could do this stuff with. To your point, in the lab, so kudos to NIST, because what they said is we're going to make it practical. We're going to actually publish this publication that shows how you can implement these gray boxes with various different vendors, different products, different ways of connecting them together. And for those of you who follow the publication, Microsoft was Enterprise 3. And we did both things. We implemented it where we showed how Microsoft can work with other products to do the same function. And then we also showed this, which is how you can try and do most of it with the Microsoft product suite, the E5 security suite. And so this is obviously how you do it with our stuff. But in general, to your point, we participated in that because there is, and that's another piece of evidence. Right? Then now that you got like government evidence that says that customers are asking the government for practical guidance on how to do this, right?
If the government is asking, you're way too late. If customers and organizations haven't considered this and thought about implementing zero trust, I think that just itself shows that if government is asking for it, we are way behind on that to get that implementation done in our organizations.
And not only is government asking for it now, the government is actually implementing it. And, we even have sections of the government that have completed part of their, implementation of their zero trust strategy that honestly wasn't actually due until I think 2025 or 2020, between 2025 and 2027. They're realizing the importance of it and actually implementing it today. In fact, Tarek just posted a post on LinkedIn maybe last week about some of our friends in some of the government agencies that are already well along in their zero trust journey, which is just awesome to see. But Victor, as you say, usually when the government, is asking for something, everyone else has usually already asked for it.
To add to this one, specifically, actually, I mean, kudos to the U.S. government. Traditionally, people have a notion that governments are, last to implement something or behind and so forth. But on cybersecurity specifically, and specifically since the executive order, they've been leading. And to Clay's point, we now have a published, our collective teams together and the deployment and the Zero Trust V team together. We're working with the federal team at Microsoft. We published a Department of Defense Zero Trust deployment. That's how the Department of Defense actually has a mandate to be done deploying by a certain date, and having the guide to help them published now is very important for them because they have very aggressive deadlines. So it's not just the government. Now the Department of Defense is even ahead of you as a customer if you're not thinking about it.
They're trailblazing. They're doing a great job, and we're learning from them. It's really been a great partnership, and we honestly, it's been awesome just to see how far ahead they really are in some of these areas.
I think what's like really interesting about all of this, like, and I love the call out that you guys made on this, because I think Victor and I have kind of seen it with like the research that we've been doing is like, it's the government that's putting out all these pieces saying that we've gone and implemented this. We've gone and, can show you the maturity level that we're at, which is insane. Like, who thought, think back like a few years ago, who would have thought that the federal government would be the one driving the bus on that front? And you can clearly see their influence on stuff like this, where you see ICAM called out, which it's like, that wasn't really an industry term that was kind of put out there. But what I loved about the work that you guys collaborated with NIST on, like, around all of this, is the reference architecture talked about policy enforcement points and policy enforcement and all of those things. And to all the practitioners out there, I can't count how many conversations I had with folks when I was at Forrester, when I was at Microsoft, even like when I was on the customer side at Prudential, asking what is a policy enforcement point and having something thrown out differently, no matter what conversation you had with folks. Because depending on your interpretation of that, like call almost anything a policy enforcement point if you get real creative enough. So I love that, the implementation architectures that you worked on with NIST show real examples of, okay, we, the vendors, we with our experience, with customers implementing all of this and our real world deployment knowledge of all of this is where your policy enforcement point should be. This is where your policy enforcement point should be. These are all where the various components sit so that you can make this a reality, like within your enterprise. So, the kind of follow-up question I have around that with you all is like, again, I know we're talking about kind of the workshop that you all worked on, with a bunch of other folks within Microsoft. Did this influence, what you ended up putting out with the workshop, or was that kind of already in the works to kind of, drive that customer deployment reality and help organizations, on this very, very complex journey?
I think the big influence was to align, and we'll talk about it when we get to the workshop, but the workshop is not actually aligned on Microsoft products. So even though it's a Microsoft Zero Trust workshop, yeah, it doesn't have a pillar for Intune and a pillar for Defender for Endpoint and a pillar for Defender for Office. No, it's actually aligned along NIST, for example, Zero Trust kind of pillars, or CISAs, like identity. And an identity you're supposed to think about, Defender. Entra, for example, as well as maybe Defender for Identity and other Entra. Or you can actually even say, I use a third-party product here and so forth. And similar in the devices, we're telling you the devices story with Intune and MDE, not just... So that's one of the big ways that influenced this, of course, is we learned very clearly that the customers, the areas of ownership at the customer, and even an advantage that helps the customer reason about this is not to think about it in terms of just positioning our own little products.
The other thing I'll say, Steve, is that the working with NIST really opened my eyes, and I think Tarek as well, to the complexity involved with a full end-to-end zero trust deployment. It is something that, we went in saying like, we're going to do this. And, it's not a overnight process. It's not a month-long process. This is something that's going to take years for companies to actually deploy end-to-end. And I would say that also, helped influence the fact that, hey, we really need a way to walk a customer through these thousands of steps that are involved, because, it's a lot more than just waving your hands and saying, hey, go do these 6 pillars. There are a lot of steps there. And that's really, I think, one of the other things that came out of the NIST engagement was just complexity.
Like, we would give the folks in the NIST lab, we would tell them, oh, go turn on this thing. And they were like, how? And we send them an article, and they're like, I got stuck and stuff. So we actually, each of these boxes, and we'll talk about this in the workshop, each of them actually takes you to a guide that talks about how to do it and supplements with the product docs. But actually, it's not trivial sometimes. It's very easy for us when we're soaking in, you, Steve, and me, we're drinking the Microsoft Kool-Aid for that many years. Oh, that's CA policy. Yeah, I know how to do that. Right? And when the NIST folks, a lot of them were coming from Linux backgrounds, AWS background, very different than folks who are helping us implement the lab, right? And it was just like, how? And or like, I don't get where to do this. So it was very eye-opening for us to learn that we need to be more prescriptive and stuff.
And that's I think 90% of the problems, or I should say complexity, when security teams are thinking about starting their journey with Zero Trust. And I love the prospect with this slide where when the vendor comes in, they show the simplified slide, but the journey actually is this. And I think you also have a journey slide there as well. For a small team, and I think I can testify to that, where most of the companies have small security teams. When they see this, they see an overload of work that it's going to almost take over their day job, night, evenings, weekends, and everything. I think that the breaking down to how do you do it is what was missing, I think, until this workshop came along, and people will, I certainly hope so, people take advantage of your hard work. From the journey to where I need to be, that's a simplified slide where the ultimate goal is. And from where I'm starting, that gap is so big, so overwhelming for a lot of security folks that it just never takes off. It just never starts because that gap is so huge. Tarek and Clay, tell me this: when you are working with the folks either at NIST or your customers, and when you go through these workshops, how many of your customers, and it could be, give me just a percentage, how many of those are actually saying that, oh yeah, I thought it was going to be easy until they had the workshop?
75% or more thought that it was going to be, actually, you know what? I would say close to 100% thought it was going to be easier than it actually was. I would say that, almost every customer I talked to was like, we got overwhelmed. We took a pause. Now we see that you have this workshop and we want to start again. Like we're ready to really walk this together and have you kind of help us, see that the full journey and give us a way to actually track that journey. And I think that's another big part of the workshop, is being able to track over time, because one of the things that's come up in this workshop a lot is hygiene. And when I talk about hygiene, I'm talking about, security hygiene, and actually, making sure that you are not only implementing the stuff, but then every 6 months, making sure that you didn't, you don't need to update a certain block for a certain operating system that's been released and change the operating system levels, or you don't need to implement a new feature or turn a knob that has just been enabled that you didn't have 6 months ago. And that's the other thing that's really come out of these workshops, is it's not a today only thing. This is something that you have to keep on doing and you have to, keep up with. And we're trying to come up with tools to help you track that a little bit better. And Tarek, anything else there?
Yeah, I was going to add, so one is, a lot of them thought it was easier to start, but a lot of them, I have all these other questions I have here, which is like, okay, I know a bunch of customers who start, but then they're not sure how far are they from where they were supposed to be, and they're not sure how to show their leadership progress. How far are they from the end either? And then the other one is coherence as well. So one of the challenges we have, like I have a customer, for example, who 3 years ago started on a zero trust journey, but they started individually. Like the devices team is doing the zero trust thing, and then the identity team is doing the zero trust thing, right? So the devices team decided to go with cloud endpoints, cloud managed endpoints, much to Clay's joy and excitement, right? So they decided they're going to move over from hybrid managed to cloud managed endpoints, but they didn't think about Windows Hello for Business. And then the identity got a year later, they're trying to, we want to push MFA for everybody, and we're going to start with SMS. I'm like, my man, those cloud join people could have turned on Windows Hello for Business such that most of your end users day to day are doing phishing users and amazing passwordless MFA. And then you still have people who need SMS. I'm not saying SMS is not going to be needed, but if they had started together and talked to each other, that's one of the things the workshop does, is actually points out the connections in the identity area to the devices area, the connections in devices area to the data area or the identity area, so that you're not in a silo. When we talk about these pillars, we highly recommend when you do the identity workshop to actually have someone from networking and someone from devices sitting in the room. Don't just do it to the identity team, because then you'll see those things. You start seeing those cracks or gaps and valuable scenarios. It's both ways, right? It's a scenario that if you had implemented the right way, you get so much value. And if you don't, you end up in a beautiful endpoint. Like Clay, you have this example out of this customer who had 100% endpoint enrollment and right, but then zero conditional access policy based on device basis.
Yeah, and that came up in a workshop, and I was going through the workshop, and we were talking about compliance policies, and I was like, well, I see all your devices are enrolled, and you have compliance policies. Let's take a look at those. And they're like, well, we actually didn't turn on compliance policies because that would be too much of an impact to our end users. And I was like, what? That's another thing that's just it's going on these workshops. Is it's like there are certain things that we take for granted that customers have turned on, and then you realize that not everyone's done it, and you have to do these things.
You touched on a point that I hear consistently from customers, that this is all good and well, zero trust. Yes, we want to implement, we want to make sure that we validate all the transactions, don't trust the devices, application, users. Totally get that. But they said, what about the delay, the latency that you're adding? What about the frustration from end user perspective? What do you say, or how do you unfold that we're adding something from zero trust perspective, which will prevent the user to go from point A to B faster? That used to be before zero trust, and after zero trust, they have added whatever the hoops. How does that get unfolded in the world of Tarek and Clay?
So this is a great primer back into the introduction slides about the principles of zero trust, and I'm not going to obviously lecture on the three famous ones. I want to highlight the invisible one, right? It's too often that people get caught up in the abstract of zero trust versus the true value of zero trust, which is at the end of the day, you can, pitch rhetorical zero trust all you want, but at the end of the day, the most thing you're trying to do is enable the business, right? So the principles of zero trust are verify explicitly, least privilege and assume breach or assume compromise, right? But ultimately, you're trying to enable the business. So, like in our work, Clay and I, actually Clay spearheaded this. The first thing we did is identify the scenarios, the value you're going to add. Like, for example, the example he mentioned about COVID, the number one thing you're doing is enabling the business. That's what you're doing, and you're enabling it secure. If you start with that lens, you usually arrive at good outcomes. If you're trying to do zero trust for the abstract theoretical exercise of zero trust, then you'll usually arrive at adding friction without this. But if you do the right things, for example, the customer he mentioned, he's done the hard work. They've done the enrollment of the devices, and the devices were enrolled, were 100% compliance. They were in good shape. There was actually no friction on the user for those devices to say, okay, if you're coming from those devices, put a conditional access clause that says that these users cannot come from non-compliant devices because that's probably the bad guy, not them. They're okay. You've done the hard work of actually fixing the device.
Yeah. And I would like to say, honestly, you're exponentially increasing your security posture at almost no impact to the end users. Sure, there might be some small impact, but you're exponentially increasing your security posture for that, small impact to the end users. And I like to reiterate that over and over with my customers is that, yes, it's important to, make sure that your customers day-to-day is not going to be impacted, but there are some small impacts that you're going to have to accept, because if you don't, you're going to.
And some of it is challenging norms, just the norms the user are used to. It's not necessarily that they're introducing friction. And not to trivialize it, sometimes the user sees a new prompt and they're like, oh my God, call support, right? We get that part. But it's an okay, in my opinion, okay cost to pay. If at the end of the day, over time, they're going to be prompted less. They're going to be surprised less. They're going to be annoyed less. So just my thought. Anyway, Steve, your signal.
Yeah, so Clay and Tarek, like, I love the enable the business piece of it. Victor and I have talked about that like on a couple of podcasts now. The question that I had kind of related back to, what you were talking about, like from your experience, and Tarek from your deployment experience, is, when organizations say they didn't turn on something because they were expecting friction, like, can you give us examples of, like, for example, you had that one customer that they were 100% enrolled, like, beautiful. Everybody could only wish for that. But they're like, it's going to cause impact if we turn on the CA policy. It's like, when in reality, from your deployment, like, knowing that turning on that CA policy may not cause any friction at all, because you're saying you have to come from a compliant device. If all your devices are compliant, or most of them are compliant, you're actually going to weed out the folks that things aren't working right to begin with. So, if you could share more of like those scenarios or those experiences that you've had with customers who have pushed back, and maybe even the politics side too, because you said, Tarek and Clay, I heard you mention you have to get folks in the room who don't traditionally talk to each other, or they spent so much time making their perfect fiefdom that everything else was ignored. So they may have to start back at square one in some instances because it wasn't designed with the overall architecture or environment.
Sure. So, we've seen this more than we would have liked or have thought that we would have seen it. And, we're running into, just to give you a few more examples, like mobile application management is another one where, we have customers who just say, hey, we don't want to require an extra pin on, for someone to open up a Outlook email or open up a Word document on their phone. Why would we do that? And once again, it comes down to the fact that, we can apply so many more controls just by applying MAM policy than, once again, it's the user can use their Face ID to, apply that pin if you allow them to do that. And it's, once again, it comes down to almost no impact to the end user. They're used to doing that every day anyway. Why not, apply that pin to require that extra level of control, just in case they do happen to lose their device that isn't managed or is managed, just to add that extra level of security on that app for your corporate data.
I think it's getting better overall. I think my customers, for example, would have been more divided 3 years ago than a year ago than this year. And so it is getting better. I'm seeing improvement on the customer side in terms of these silos. I'm seeing more of these walls being kind of torn down, which is a good. Obviously, in the smaller customers, there was no walls. As you said, there was like two guys anyways in IT. But in the larger customers, there were all these barriers, and I think it's getting better. There's still a lot of barriers to overcome in terms of, like, in this case, it's mental barriers. Like, for example, the VPN, one of the last, sacred things that are standing out there from the, earlier era that eventually probably will go away from most customers, as you said, Victor, like SaaS. Why do I have a VPN? Why bring the endpoint with its garbage on the network and then try to clean it? Just keep it off the network, right? And so that last bastion of good old, old school security is going to have to go away at some point, and there will be a battle. But the networking teams are a big part of security still. They're not going to go away. The networking teams will be there. Just will be a different way of doing security, right? So we do face that friction, and but I also think it's getting better. Just long story short, we do want to, like, I think mention that we do have the effort we were talking about is the workshop. So I don't know if
I'll quickly say this. I think we couldn't possibly, even if we tried, to pack the workshop work into this session or this episode. So what Steve and I are requesting, Tarek and Clay, that if we can actually host a workshop for our audience, and we'll set up the registration page and everything. We'll announce it on our LinkedIn and send an email to our listeners. If you could tell us a little bit about what the workshop is, what people can expect out of it, and what's the key takeaway from there? So once they're walking away after the workshop, can they go just straight up implementation, or would that give them enough information to start asking the right questions?
I'll try to do a quick kind of. So first of all, please check out this website, ak.ms/ZT workshop. It's a launch website. It has links, primers about what is Zero Trust. It has links on what does the workshop look like, why you should do it. It has training materials on each pillar of the workshop. At a high level, what is our goal? Right? Ultimately, it's to help a customer deploy and be secure, ultimately. But there's all these other side benefits. Most important of all is you get an artifact in your hand as a customer that says, this is my journey, customized to me. The high level of it looks something like this. This is, for example, the identity pillar. But the first thing is you see at the bottom here that's aligned to kind of Zero Trust pillars, apps, data, devices, not products. The second thing is you've got the areas of the thing. For example, an identity, users and groups, apps, privileged access. Those are the kind of the areas of IAM, as opposed to, again, feature areas like conditional access, blah, blah, blah. And then for each one, we have this, up the top, we give you things in the first, then next flow. So you take this one and you think about, like, we're asking you, what is your conditional access posture? First, like, do you have a posture? Between you and the CISO, like, as a leadership team, when will you MFA? When will you not MFA, right? And then we're asking you, like, for example, okay, stop buying old apps. Stop, when you're buying new apps, start make sure that they're modern so that they can do SAML or modern authentication, so that then you can do MFA. And so we give you a first, then next. So it helps you structure it in your mind so that you're not solving problem 3 before problem 1. And then for each box, as I mentioned, you click on this thing, it gives you detailed guidance of what this thing is and how you go about tackling it, not just a slogan like a one-line sentence. And finally, for each box, you click on it and you say, where am I in this place? So to your question, you can choose to do it yourself. If you have a partner, we highly recommend you work with your partner. If you have a partner, a Zero Trust deployment partner, consultant, an advisor, or work with Microsoft account team, we can help you with this, right? So any of them can help you guys kind of think through, and you can choose that third party. I'm never going to do this one, right? But then at the very end, you hit save, and now you've got this artifact that you can revisit 6 months from now or a year from now, and rerun again and check, and you can take that thing and pump it into Jira or ADO, and create projects, deployment projects. And you say, okay, Steve is going to go do the MFA one, and I'm going to go do the devices one, right? So it's a fairly practical tool that helps you both on one hand be comprehensive, and on the other hand, be practical in terms of what am I going to do next, first, then next.
I would have killed for a tool like this, like back when I was deploying some of this stuff. Like the fact that you can track progress is fantastic.
And my skeptical people in the audience, they're like, yeah, this is all good and well until I see it. This seems too good to be true. So again, we invite everyone to stay subscribed to our LinkedIn channel. We will post information about the workshop, and you will see this firsthand how this works. I've got a sneak peek.
We will do a model delivery of the identity pillar, the data pillar, and the devices pillar with your audience so they can see how we reason through each box, not even just at a high level where I just did.
I don't think we've offered that for any other audiences, so it's a big deal. Definitely appreciate you having the show today.
Yeah, no, you guys are setting a high bar for yourselves. So, but
I think they're gonna meet it with the flying colors, especially the work they have already put in. This is something that I think community should learn. Community should take advantage of.
yeah, knowing these guys, you guys are gonna totally kill it. Tarek and Clay, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like, I'm very much, me and Victor are very much looking forward to having you back to go through this workshop with the audience. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us on Zero Trust Journey today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your network. We'd love to hear your feedback. Anything else that you're interested in sharing on your own Zero Trust story, please feel free to reach out anytime. And again, thank you so much, guys, for coming on the show. It was a fantastic conversation.
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Victor. It was great to be on the show.
Thanks for joining us on Zero Trust Journey. If this episode sparked new ideas or gave you practical insights, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with your network. Your support helps us continue bringing you valuable conversations and real-world stories. We'd love to hear from you. Share your feedback or even your own Zero Trust journey by reaching out to us. Your story could inspire others in the community. Stay tuned for more expert insights, compelling stories, and actionable advice to help you advance your Zero Trust strategy. Until next time, stay curious and keep making progress on your Zero Trust journey. See you in the next episode.